I actually thought it was kind of good. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's episode will be all about discussing the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation that is on Netflix. So I've seen a lot of discourse going on, like, on the internet about this show, and I recently finished watching it with my boyfriend, and I don't know where exactly I fall, if I'm with the majority or with the minority on this. I'm not sure where exactly the lines are drawn. I actually thought that this was a pretty good adaptation. Now, there were certainly things that I felt weren't done very well in this compared to the original, and I think that there's things that they definitely could have done better. But overall, looking at it with how I was viewing it, I think it was pretty good. So I am one of the kids that has watched the entirety of Avatar during their childhood and then also decided to rewatch it during the rejuvenated hype during the shutdown. So I am very familiar with all of the content, and let's just specify with book 1 because that is all that season 1 of the live adaptation covers. And going into this adaptation, I was worried. We've all seen the movie adaptation. I actually personally didn't even see it. I was told by my friends it wasn't worth it. They couldn't even get the names right. The bending looked bad. So I personally have not even watched that. But this one, I had higher hopes for. I was hoping, because it was through Netflix, that the budget was a good amount for what they were trying to do. Because it was a series rather than a movie, I was hoping they would give adequate time to each of the major events that happened in book 1. And overall, I just hope that they had learned from the past mistakes and would better represent the content that was in the original cartoon. I would say for the most part, that was all pretty good. So I thought that the bending actually looked really good. That was the main worry, was the CG for the bending would look really bad. But honestly, I thought it all looked pretty great. I thought that the acting was pretty good. Some of it I thought fell a bit flat, but I really don't know if I should be putting that on the actor, who are all actually children. So either way, I'm going to cut them some slack because they are pretty young. Or if I should be aiming it towards the director or whoever is directing the acting. My biggest gripe with the whole thing was due to it having to cover the entirety of book 1 in only 8 one-hour-long episodes. Everything felt pretty rushed. A lot of the events felt pretty condensed. All of the big events happened in the city of Omashu, and it felt very odd seeing so many different characters and so many things happen in that city, people interacting that really should never have met. It felt very unusual. It didn't feel right. That is really my biggest gripe, was the condensing of everything. Now, something that I was extremely worried about, that I know a lot of people have really big gripes with, is that this was not going to be a one-to-one remake. It was going to be its own take on the content. And we were just getting news after news of just things that weren't sitting well with people. The original creators that were participating in it and kind of let everyone breathe a sigh of relief, they left due to creative differences. And then it came out that they were changing some major points in the content. Stuff like Sokka was no longer sexist, so that left me and a lot of other people wondering what's going to happen when they get to Kyoshi Island. How is he going to learn these really valuable lessons that help shape him and his character for the rest of the show? They said that we're making Aang more mature. Well, where's the entire character that Aang is in the cartoon? He's this lighthearted, carefree child that in the beginning runs from his responsibilities because he doesn't want to be the Avatar, to that character arc of him becoming this pillar of hope and taking on the Fire Nation. So there was a lot of things that I was very hesitant about going into the show. One thing that I didn't see a whole lot of people talk about prior that definitely was quite loud in the discourse after the show was released was the lack of rage with Katara. Stuff as simple as when they find Aang in the iceberg, she's not fighting with Sokka, she's not yelling, she's not breaking Aang free because of her inner rage, she's just trying to get their boat to come back to them and just accidentally breaks him out of this ice pillar. So all of these changes really altered some of the chemistry between the characters, between the live action and the original cartoon. This alone can make things feel pretty off, and I did kind of notice that, but I do think it gets better as the show goes on. So aside from all that, I do think that the live action actually does quite a few things really well, and my main compliment to it is actually the add-in of a lot of extra scenes that we never got. Even from the very start, that dramatic shrouded in shadow scene of the message trying to get to the Earth King, and it turning out to be an entire ploy to redirect all of the forces, that way they could take out the air nomads. We never got anything like that in the original, and having that be in there as the beginning part really sets the scope, people's minds of what is happening in this world. And I think that's really great for people who are watching this for the first time and have no prior knowledge to the original content. And not only was there that, there was also a bunch of add-ins for backstory from characters that really fleshed them out even more than they were in the original cartoon. And that's really saying something, because I think these characters from the original animation were great. They were three-dimensional, they had their flaws that held them back, they had tasks that they need to overcome to reach the goals that were all separate, they had their own identity in their own right. They weren't sidekicks for this main MC that was perfect in every way. I really liked that they added more to that. Stuff as simple as having those little slivers of backstory for Sokka and Katara when they're in the spirit realm. Seeing why Katara brings up her mom so much in the original is because she basically caused her mom to die. So that really gave more substance to her character. Seeing Sokka force himself to become the warrior that his father wanted him to be because he wanted to prove himself. He wanted to be worthy of his father's praise. Like, just those were maybe a minute long each, but they added a lot of substance for me, someone who had watched the original, and I'm sure a lot of other people felt the same. And it might have been something that was overlooked by someone who was watching this IP for the first time through this show. One of the biggest impacts, I think, was the inclusion of a bigger role for 𝔽𝕉. Seeing him in the beginning, seeing the relationship between him and Aang, him still wanting to be his friend, and then seeing him again in his little hut in the spirit realm, only for him to look so sad when Aang says, "I have to go save my friends, but we can talk more when we get back," and just everyone watching realizing that he won't be back. And I think that's another thing that hits a lot harder if you know the content from the cartoon. I don't think that the live action did a great job at interconnecting a lot of the characters and the relationships, but I think those added in pieces do a pretty good job at connecting for the new people and just giving existing fans of Avatar just even more knowledge to connect everything and feel a deeper connection with this character knowing this new knowledge. Some of my favorite add-ons was between Zuko and Iroh. Stuff that really dives into what the family dynamic was for them back in the Fire Nation. Stuff as simple as, in the cartoon, we never got a name for Iroh's son who had passed in the war. Now we do. We get his name, we get an entire funeral scene, we get Iroh looking distraught because he's lost his only son, we get Zuko trying to play the role of a prince, just going to give his grievances at a funeral, and then breaking down and showing that he also lost someone very close to him, and that was such a bonding moment between him and Iroh in the show. Seeing stuff like Zuko saving his entire crew, and that's why he was banished, was because he spoke out to save that fleet of people. He didn't want them to go and needlessly get sacrificed. That opened up an entirely new dimension to him as this rage-filled, vengeance-filled character in the first book. I just thought these add-ins really just added to this character that has one of the best redemption arcs in all of animation, from Western animation to Japanese anime to anywhere else. A lot of people will say Zuko has one of the best redemption arcs, and I think adding that just little depth of humanity in his character in the beginning, it just does something good for his character. One of the things that almost slipped by me completely because it was so seamlessly added in was the early edition of Azula. I had almost completely forgotten that she is not in book 1, but adding her in allowed for the show to show that sibling rivalry, that their dad is putting them up against each other to fight it out for the right to bear the throne. After he resigns, dies, who's gonna be the next Fire Lord? And it is very interesting. In the live action, he seemed to almost favor Zuko more. He seemed to be screwing with Azula a lot more, and I'm not sure this totally could have been just to have her fight harder for her role as potential Fire Lord, or he could have actually been rooting for Zuko the entire time. But in the animation, he totally seemed to be on Azula's side and completely forgot about his son. So that was a very interesting take that had you thinking. Now, is this something that I would recommend in place of the original? No. I would definitely recommend watching the original Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated version. Watch that first. And then if you want more, I think that this is a nice show to watch after for a little more content related to your favorite IP, more substance for some of the characters. The main way that I found this series enjoyable was I was looking at it as its own entity. I was not expecting it to be a one-to-one. If I went in expecting this to just be a live adaptation, a live version of what I watched as a child and loved, I would have been extremely disappointed. I would have been very upset. But I went in knowing they're going to change some things. It's not going to be the same as what I remember. I had to look at it and go, yes, they made Aang be able to fly, and that is not right. Yes, they took away a lot of the build-up for Sokka's relationships. They changed how the entire moon spirit sequence went. It was still the end goal was the same, but they changed the method. So I had to look at it as this is a distinct, different retelling of similar events. And that is what I tell all of my friends when they come up and ask me, should I watch the live action Avatar? And all of them have watched the original and loved it. I say, if you can hold it in its own entity away from the original, I think it's great. I think you can get something out of it. I'm not gonna say you're gonna love it, but I think you will enjoy it. And I think that is what makes it great. I think if they did try and honestly do a one-to-one, I think it would have been bad. I don't think it would have gone over well. I think it would have been just like the movie. No one would have liked it. So I think this, them changing things, them adding things, was the only way for them to do it and do it any sort of close to good. So in the end, I think that this was a good adaptation. I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying it's good. I am actually very excited that Netflix did redeem it, and they will be able to do seasons 2 and 3, which is the entire animation show. It had 3 seasons. It had books 1 through 3, and we're gonna get those in the live action. So now I basically get a different universe's telling of the story of the Avatar. That is basically all I have to say on this. I'm sure I have more thoughts that I will remember while I'm editing. So if you agree with me, if you disagree, what did you think of this adaptation? What did you think of the live action? Leave those down in the comments. I love to hear other people's thoughts on this. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you want to bring up something in this conversation that I overlooked? Feel free. I would love to see that all in the comments below. Thank you everyone who watched the video. I hope that you did get something out of it in the end, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye guys.